Before we get started with this week's episode, I just want to take a moment to remind people that if anything we're talking about today, we don't get super serious in the show usually. If any of you out there listening to this podcast can relate to things we're talking about, experience the symptoms that we're describing, I would encourage you to reach out and reach out for help. We live in Canada, so I can only recommend Canadian resources to you. Mm-hmm. But the Canadian Mental Health Association, if you go on their website, you can find resources across the country. There's also a crisis hotline you can call, 1-833-456-4566. That's toll free, 24/7 at all hours. So if you are experiencing a mental health moment, or you're in need of support, you can certainly call that number. We'll put links in the show notes to where you can find resources as well. And please know that you're not alone. So Ben the Movie Buff, normally we have like the intro play and then we just get into the episode. But we got an email this week.
Cool.
That includes our new theme song.
Okay.
So I feel like we need to kind of do more of a cold open here and actually get into the mail before we actually get into the episode, because how are we going to introduce the new theme song if we haven't read the email where it comes from? You know,
right.
We have an email here from Rob Kakel. So if you can read this for us.
All right. So, hey guys, I just heard that you just reached your 150th episode. That's awesome. Congratulations. That's awesome. Wow. It's so amazing. I've said that's awesome twice. And I was right. In fact, I should say it 150 times for every awesome episode that you've done. Do you want me to say it?
Well, what does the email show? Just like maybe don't read it all. But.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, it says that's awesome 150 times. Like it keeps on going and going and going. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. Just, yeah, it has that going for a while. And then at the bottom it says, wow, amazing. I've attached a special surprise. God bless you.
As we now transition to the intro for the show, you'll hear a beeping. I've got a ham in the oven I got to take out. So, I'll play the new theme song for Ben the Movie Buff, but then you guys will just hear the intro to the show with the new theme song. My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
Hey, how are you? My name is Ben, and I am a movie buff. I am one part video game nerd, one part comic book nerd, but all parts movie nerd.
Our mission is to bring nerd culture to the masses
by putting it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Pound. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, Mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
That's right.
So for everybody listening at home, the ham is out of the oven. I only spilled a little bit of the water in the oven, but I guess it's water, so it's fine to spill that in the oven.
Yep. No casualties. We're good.
So Ben the Movie Buff, hopefully the smell of cooked ham isn't too distracting for you.
No, it's fine. I actually went to a Chinese buffet about 4 or 5 hours ago, and I'm still stuffed. So I'm good. I won't need to eat until tomorrow afternoon.
So hopefully everyone at home likes the new theme song created by Rob Kakel.
I know I did. That was awesome.
So thank you, Rob, for sending that in. Thank you for congratulating us on 150 episodes of The Bat Jar.
Yes.
As I mentioned on the last episode, we also have now passed by our 3rd year anniversary. Mm-hmm. The first episode of The Bat Jar podcast, in which Asian John and I reviewed one of the first comic books I ever bought, was released on October 19th, 2016.
Wow.
So at the time of recording this episode, we're basically already a week past that.
Yeah.
So happy 3rd anniversary, Ben the Movie Buff.
No, it's pretty awesome. This is great to be a part of, and congratulations to you, Average Joe, for keeping this going for as long as you have. And here's to many more.
Yes, and ignoring the 3rd year anniversary, it's also the 150th episode of the podcast.
Yep.
So I don't know what milestone's more important, to acknowledge the 3rd year anniversary or the 150th episode.
I'd say both are equally important. That's how we cheat and say, yeah, they're both important.
If you think about it, 3 years, there's 52 weeks in the year.
Mm-hmm.
That basically means that I guess there's been 6 weeks in the last 3 years where we have not done podcasts. And I think this 2-week gap we just took was one of the longest hiatuses we've ever had.
Yeah.
So I've been chomping at the bit to get back on the podcast and talking.
Yes.
And you every time you reach a milestone, you're like, okay, is this where it's meant to end? Is because we've done our thing? But there's been so much stuff happening in nerd culture. Like there's a Star Wars 9 trailer and all the news related to that, and it's ticket sales and what all these older movie directors are saying about comic book movies all of a sudden. And
yeah.
And I'm just reminded, you know what? There's still lots of things to be said. I'm not out of ideas, and I certainly still have opinions. So at least for the near future, it's exciting to see the podcast continue. Mm-hmm. And to all the people who've been part of the podcast up until now, all of the guests we've had, of course, Asian John, the show would have never started without him.
Yep. And
his owning the sound equipment necessary for us to get going.
That's right, yeah.
And then to Pixel Patch, who will be coming back in a few months, and to Ben the Movie Buff, who is you.
Yeah, that is me. Is I.
Dr. What, and every other guest host who's been a part of the show. Mm-hmm. This podcast would not exist without you guys, because as interesting as I might think myself to be, this podcast would utterly fail if it was just me talking to the bat jar.
Yeah.
Because frankly, I don't think my opinion is good enough or interesting enough to be a podcast of its own. I've really enjoyed having the conversations with other people.
Yes.
Because I kind of walk into a lot of these conversations with my opinions and my flags set in the ground, like, this is how I feel about something. Yep. And then it's through kind of bouncing my ideas off of somebody else, I realize, oh, you know what? I haven't really thought all this through.
Yeah.
And there's other ways of viewing these things. So I'm grateful. This has been a great therapeutic experience for me thus far, learning more about how other people can view the same, pieces of media and nerd culture that I've been exposed to.
If there's anything I've learned from making films, is that I made a film once by myself with no one's help except for me. It starred me. I wrote it. I edited it. I did the camera work. And while it was a cool experiment, it didn't really feel all that exciting at the end of the day, because film is a collaborative effort, and in the same way that these podcasts are very much a collaborative effort. So, it's been really cool to have all these guests on, and for me to come on once in a while to chat with you guys. And also hats off to you, Average Joe, for keeping this going as long as you have. And like I've said, I don't think there's any reason to I think we've had a good run, so let's call it a day. There will always be stuff to talk about in regarding what we do. So yeah, let's keep this train going.
So thanks to Rob Kakel for the new theme song. Mm-hmm. Thanks to Jeremy Eckert, who has provided our kind of outro music for Forever and a Day now. Mm-hmm. And thank you to you guys, everyone who listens. Obviously, this podcast wouldn't exist if there wasn't at least one, a handful of people downloading it every week.
Yes.
Because obviously, this podcast does not exist just for me to be therapeutic and talk things out for myself. Mm-hmm. It's because there's people listening to it. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Having said that, this week's episode, oh boy, there is a lot to be said about the Joker movie. Mm-hmm. Now, we our most recent episode was actually ranking all of the interpretations of Joker on film we've seen thus far.
Yes,
and it was obviously done to tie into the release of the Joker movie, but it was also a chance for us to look at the character of the Joker and what is it about the Joker character that makes him so interesting to us, and how the different representations of the Joker kind of emphasize certain elements of the character and whatnot. Yeah. So, Ben the Movie Buff, you weren't directly a part of that episode. Your rankings influenced the Batjar's official ranking of the Jokers.
Right. Yeah.
But I thought this would be a good chance for us before we actually get talking to the Joker movie to talk about the character. Yeah. Do you have a favorite Joker moment? And this can be from any media. It can be from a comic book or a video game or a TV show or a movie.
Yeah. So I think, because there are a lot of good ones to choose from, because, I remember watching the Joker in the Batman TV series from the 60s, and then seeing the Joker in the animated series, and then in Batman 1989, Dark Knight, Suicide Squad. We've seen a lot of Joker over the last while. But if I had to pick one, I would probably pick the moment, the pencil trick from The Dark Knight. for the reason that I remember seeing The Dark Knight at a midnight screening back in July 2008, and that's crazy to believe that's 11 years ago. But I remember getting into this packed theater. Everyone was so excited for this movie because we knew, of course, that Heath Ledger had passed away earlier that year in January, I think. So, of course, we all wanted to see what's this big Joker deal about, right? Like, we hear it's amazing. Like, you know, let's see what's going on here. And while I don't think the pencil trick is the first scene that he's in, because he's in the first scene of the movie, I think there's like a bit of a break where we don't see him. And then he comes in for, you know, when he comes into all the mob bosses talking, and he does the whole, and I thought my jokes were bad. and one... Yeah, once in a while I try to do a good Heath Ledger in person, because I think, yeah, like, what a great performance.
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Give me one reason why I shouldn't have my boy here pull your head off.
How about a magic trick? I'm gonna make this pencil disappear. Ta-da! It's gone. Oh, and by the way, the suit, it wasn't cheap. You ought to know, you bought it.
But yeah, the moment where he's like, want to see a magic trick, and he puts the pencil down, and he gets one of the henchmen or whatnot, and puts the pencil through his eye, and then says, "See, it's gone." I think for me, it's very memorable. Because, I mean, like, of the fact that it's, you know, it's like, hey, here's a magic trick, but it's actually going to result in something violent. But I remember when I saw the movie in theaters, half the audience was in shock, like, audibly gasping at what they were seeing, even though it's not very graphic, but I think we can still, like, imagine something like that in detail, and it's kind of horrific, while the other half laughed. And I think it kind of made me feel like, you know, this Joker character, someone that sometimes you're laughing at him and sometimes you're in shock of what he's doing. And I think that maybe is not like the best representation, but I feel like that is part of the Joker character, is that sometimes you laugh, sometimes you're horrified, sometimes you're scared. And that's kind of the unpredictability about him, is that you're never sure when he's going to do something that might make you kind of laugh nervously, or when he's going to do something that's going to have your jaw on the floor. So for me, I would probably pick that as my favorite moment, because I remember the reaction of all the audience around me. And then, too, I was also like, oh, my goodness, ha, 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 that's kind of funny. And, yeah, so I would pick that one.
Very interesting.
Yep.
I think for myself, I mentioned in the last episode that I think the best performance or portrayal of Joker was in the Batman Beyond movie, Return of the Joker.
Right.
And there's a moment in that movie where it's, you know, it's a flashback showing you like classic Batman. Because for people who don't understand, Batman Beyond is like sci-fi future Batman.
Right. Yeah.
So they have a moment in the movie where they kind of flash you back to like the animated series Batman. And it's supposed to be his final fight with the Joker. And without spoiling anything, there's a moment where the Joker discloses to Batman that he has learned about his secret identity.
Right.
As Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
Which, of course, it's a huge deal. It's like, oh my goodness, like the Joker knows who Batman is now.
Yeah.
And the Joker basically just makes fun of Batman. He's like, he makes a comment essentially insulting him for saying, this is anticlimactic. You're just a little, I think he says something like, you're just a little boy in a play suit crying for mommy and daddy. Oh. And there's just like, there's something so fascinating about the Joker where it's like I've always found the antagonism between Batman and Joker so interesting. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so much more palpable when there isn't any personal connection between them. Right. Which is, again, something I spoke about in the last episode.
Yep.
But that universe, or that, you know, that franchise is a perfect example of the real and animosity, the antagonism between those two characters without needing any personal connection. They have a history without really knowing each other. Right. And in that moment where the Joker finally gets insight as to who Batman really is, he just plays it off as a joke. Yeah. And he just kind of like uses the opportunity to like dig the knife into him in a metaphorical sense.
Right. Yeah.
To merely poke fun at Batman's psychology and who he is. And I was like, that's the Joker. That like, you know, twisting of the proverbial, like I think he stabs him with a knife literally in the movie later, but in that moment to just like really like poking at the core of who Batman is.
Yeah.
It's true, Batsy. I know everything. And kind of like the kid who peeks at his Christmas presents, I must admit, it's sadly anticlimactic.
Behind all the sturm and batarangs, you're just a little boy in a play suit crying for mommy and daddy. It'd be funny if it weren't so pathetic. No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.
And that's who the Joker is. Somebody who can get under Batman's skin
Right.
in a way no other villain can.
Right. Wow.
So now that we've gone out of the way to talk about how great the Joker can be in different interpretations, let's talk about this movie.
Yeah.
It was first announced in August of 2017. And it announced, at the time, it was said that Todd Phillips was going to be the director and that Martin Scorsese was going to be a producer. And I was very kind of surprised because I only recognized Todd Phillips' name from the Hangover movies.
Yes.
And I thought, that's really weird that the guy who did The Hangover is going to do a movie about the Joker, and he's going to work with Martin Scorsese.
Yeah.
And hearing not too long after that was going to be a prequel, or like an origin story for the Joker.
Yep.
I was like, is this going to be the origin of the Jared Leto Joker? Because this was just a year after Suicide Squad had come out. And at that point, DC seemed pretty, I would say, consistent with the idea that their films were all going to be connected like Marvel's were.
Right.
So it would just make sense. It's like, well, you've introduced the Joker, ergo this must be the origin of that Joker.
Yep.
Were you kind of paying attention at that time when that announcement was made? Were you aware of it?
Vaguely, yeah. I think it's one of those things where, like, man, the world of movie news, I feel like there's so much going on. And yes, there are some big stories about, like, oh, this movie gets announced, this person gets cast, this person is dropped and being replaced by this person. But yeah, I think I do remember seeing it kind of briefly and thinking to myself, like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'd be interested in seeing something like that. But there must have been some other stuff going on at the time because I don't remember intently following the Joker news, just hearing that, oh, there's a Joker movie being made by Todd Phillips, which, of course, I know from the Hangover movies. He also directed Old School, Road Trip, Due Date. So, yeah, just like a lot of R-rated vulgar comedy movies. So that made me wonder what that was about. But I guess it goes to show, it's like, well, don't judge the decision until you've seen the movie because you never know what you might get, it would seem.
And to be frank, a lot of movies get announced,
Yeah.
but they don't always end up getting made.
That's right. Yeah.
So like they've announced a Nightwing movie for almost 2 years now, and I don't think they've made any progress on that.
Yeah.
So when I heard that this movie was being made, I was, like you, curious, but mostly frustrated because I've made it very clear on this show and in my other avenues of my life that the Joker is a character that works best when you don't understand where he comes from.
Right.
And to give him a definitive origin or to even give an origin story from in film, it's something I'm not interested in. So admittedly, from the very hop, I was kind of very uneasy about this idea.
Yeah.
And when, this was before Justice League came out, so I don't know if there were plans initially for it to be part of the extended universe.
Okay.
But after Justice League came out and was Justice League, I think they were much more open to the idea of maybe let's not make every movie connected to each other. Maybe we've kind of written ourselves into a hole here.
Right, yeah. Let's give ourselves more flexibility.
Which is kind of a shame because, as we talked about last week, there was like a supposed history between the Jared Leto Joker and the Ben Affleck Batman that we only got really mild teases of.
Yes.
Throughout the movies they appeared in, and they'll never get resolved now. But
yeah.
But it was several months later in July 2018 that Joaquin Phoenix was announced to star as the Joker in this movie.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting choice because the movies I've seen him in, he's very serious and he's kind of one of those actors who kind of like a chameleon, like disappears into the role he's playing.
Yeah.
So to this day, people will get mad at me. I have not actually watched Gladiator.
Oh, Joe. Okay, well, that's another thing you got to add to your watch list. Gladiator is in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. Russell Crowe's great in it, and as is obviously Joaquin Phoenix. Please, Joe, at some point when you get a
will I
chance,
be entertained?
You will be entertained. Oh, you will be entertained. You have no choice not to be. But yeah, it's an amazing movie. So yeah, please one day or sooner than later, give it a watch. Highly recommended from the movie buff.
Now, was the announcement of Joaquin Phoenix something that excited you or made you worried about this movie?
It was just another decision that I was like, okay, because you know how sometimes like the internet will like flip out when, like when Ben Affleck was cast as Batman, right? And like everyone loses their minds, but there's always that one person that's like, let's just wait and see the movie and see how we feel after we've seen the movie. Because like I like to just keep an open mind. I mean, yes, I might be concerned, I might be excited, but I think at the end of the day, you just have to remember, like, are you really going to judge a performance based on your preconceived notion of, oh, I don't think they're going to do well, and then walking in with that? Like, if you carry that baggage in with you, then yes, you might have a hard time being able to see outside your preconceived notion, right? So I think for me, when I heard that Joaquin Phoenix was going to be cast as the Joker, I was like, I think he's got this. I mean, we'll see when we get to the actual movie, but if you were to ask me, name a movie with a bad Joaquin Phoenix performance, I haven't seen all of his movies, but I'd have a hard time finding one, because I think he is consistently a good actor who, like you say, is kind of good as like a character actor, right? Who kind of is known for these different roles that he plays. And yeah, can be serious, can be kind of quirky, but I really like him as an actor. So yeah, I was hopeful. I was like, I think he can do this.
By the time the first trailer came out, it became clear to me that this was not going to be the movie I was wanting it to be.
Yeah.
And this was also around the time that, comments from the production team came out saying that it was not based on anything specific from the comics.
Right, yeah.
And we'll get into more what that means later.
Mm-hmm.
But all it did to poor average Joe at the time was, ah!
Yeah.
Because I get it. Not being faithful to the comics sometimes produces really great films.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the Joker's the character to do this for, but because there isn't a definitive origin story for the Joker.
Right.
And anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Needless to say, Average Joe was not happy when that trailer came out.
Right. Okay.
But it did look interesting.
Yeah.
Like, that's the one thing I'll give her credit for. It's like, okay, like, you have my attention.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And then what got fascinating is as it got closer and closer to the film's release, there was starting to be this weird thing where both hype and controversy emerged around the film.
Right.
The movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, where there was a shooting that happened during the premiere of The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
They announced that they were not going to screen the Joker.
Mm-hmm.
And that was certainly getting people's attention.
Yep.
Apparently, I didn't realize this until today, but in the weeks leading up to the release of the movie, the U.S. military actually sent out an email to all their armed forces basically saying, this movie may inspire a mass shooting.
Right.
And there were more and more articles being kind of like spread around suggesting things like that the film was going to inspire people to take actions of violence towards the public.
Mm-hmm.
And then that led to people saying, well, we shouldn't even release this movie. It's dangerous to release a film like this if it's going to incite such negative reactions from people.
Yep.
I saw one theater in the States. I can't remember where it was, but they literally had like someone posted a picture on Facebook of this little poster next to the ticket booth saying that they basically were saying, if you're going to see the Joker, you can't see this movie by yourself.
Okay.
In other words, they're basically banning single riders from seeing the Joker.
Okay.
And I thought that was so interesting to say, okay, this is a movie that is deemed like so controversial or so disturbing that they're not willing to let people go see it by themselves.
Right.
And of course, that was just at the one theater. That wasn't across a whole chain. Apparently, there was actually one theater chain in the States that decided not to show it at all.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And like a lot of other R-rated movies, it didn't get a release in China.
Yep.
So, having said all of that, what were your thoughts on this whole emerging controversy around the film? Did that make you interested in seeing the movie, or did it kind of make you scratch your head?
No, I think if anything, like I was already decided, hearing more and more about the movie, that this was a movie that I wanted to see. I think what really got my attention was that it got a lot of festival buzz when it was going through the festival circuit a few months ago. And right now, I think the rating of the movie on IMDb is like 8.9, but it was at 9.5 for a while, right? And it would get more and more votes, but it was still at 9.5. And that's impressive, right? Not that many movies can hold that for as long as Joker did. So hearing the buzz that I did about it winning certain awards at festivals and whatnot, I knew for sure. I was like, I kind of wanted already to see this movie, but now I definitely absolutely want to. Then the controversy hit, and you know what? I think a movie with controversy like that, in most cases, just makes me all the more interested in seeing the movie. Right now, let's keep in mind that this is not true for every single movie. Right? I mean, I guess it's kind of a strange example, but I'd like to think there's some controversy around this movie. When 50 Shades of Grey came out in theaters, almost 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of controversy about it because, it was like, basically just taking the story from the book. And of course, a lot of people from different sides of from different walks of life were saying like, you know, like this is not like a good movie to be watching, and there's a lot of problematic content here. So there's controversy there. But me already knowing what the story was about, I was like, I don't need to go see this movie. Like, I really, like, I know what the story is about. I read a summary, and unless they change the movie completely to be something else, it's going to be exactly what you expect. So that's a case where I'm like, you know, I can skip out on seeing a movie like this. But something like The Joker, something like, as you were mentioning earlier, like, here's a guy who never really had a definitive backstory, and now here's this movie that's going to give you more or less a definitive backstory. I was all the more eager to see what it was about, because remember, when there's controversy surrounding a movie, you know, the only way to be part of that discussion, to be, you know, like a real part of the discussion is to see the movie. Like, I can't stand it when people judge movies. And, like, I'll ask them, like, you've seen the movie, though, right? And they're like, no. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're passing judgment on this movie that you haven't seen? And once again, there are exceptions to this rule. But I feel for the most part, especially something like Joker, you know, yeah, if you're going to be talking about this movie, it means that you've seen it and that you are able to talk about it at the same level that someone else has if they've seen it as well. So, yeah, if anything, I was just all the more eager because I heard some early praise for it.
And you mentioned the festivals at the Cannes Film Festival. It won the Golden Lion Award for like best movie, and apparently after it screened, it had an 8-minute standing ovation.
Yes.
Can you imagine? I don't think I would stand and applaud a movie for 8 minutes. But I guess the people in that room felt that it was that great a film.
Yeah, a few times that happens where they're like, you know, a certain movie, it gets like a 10-minute standing ovation, and you hope that they're truthful with those numbers. And if I remember correctly, I think it's actually the Venice Film Festival where it won the Golden Lion. Because the Cannes is the Palme d'Or, which I think the Cannes Film Festival happens in like May or something like that, so I don't think it was done there. But yes, at Venice, which is still a big deal, it didn't win the Golden Lion and still got lots of praise. So yeah, from that's what solidified it for me being like, okay, now I definitely have to see this.
When looking at reviews from critics, this movie continues to be controversial. So,
yes,
you know, the media at large are providing all their commentary on should the movie be screened or not, or you know. But I've seen some critics go as far as say it's irresponsible to have had made this movie.
Yeah.
And what I found very interesting is when you start looking at the things we usually look at to see how are critics talking about the movie.
Yeah.
Everyone is much more divisive and like unclear than we usually see with movies. Usually it's like either a movie is loved by critics or it's hated.
Yeah.
And it's either loved by audiences or hated by audiences. But, you know, right now, if I go to Rotten Tomatoes, Joker only has 69%.
I heard about that,
it has 500 counted reviews from critics, which seems to be more than a lot of movies get.
That is a lot. 500, that's a high number compared to other big movies.
Which means that a lot of critics felt the need to review the movie and weigh in on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the audience score is 89%, which is, again, very much higher.
Exactly, yeah.
And again, at this point, there are 54,000 verified rankings on Rotten Tomatoes for the film.
Yeah.
When it aired in theaters, first weekend, audiences gave it a B+ with Cinema Score.
Yeah.
So that usually means people enjoyed it, but it means that it wasn't a hit with everybody.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, you know, it's been a few weeks now since the movie came out. It's been almost a month, actually.
Yep.
And I've been doing my best to like look out for different perspectives to kind of hear what people are saying, because what I'm generally finding among my like crop of YouTubers and Twitter people that I pay attention to, there's a lot of different things being said about this movie. There's one YouTuber I follow. His name is Andre Meadows, but his channel's called Black Nerd Comedy.
Oh, that guy. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know Andre.
And he made a point. You know him personally?
I do, yeah. In fact, I'm going to be having dinner with him after this podcast.
Jealous.
I know of him.
Okay. But he made a point of saying that all of the touchy subject matter in the film, he's like, yeah, I already know about that. Like he wasn't very impressed with the movie. He felt that it was just saying things that people already knew.
Right.
So he's like, "Woo, big deal."
Yeah.
But then there's a podcast I listen to called Clerically Speaking, where it's two Catholic priests basically talking about parish life.
Right.
But they went on for about 8 minutes about the Joker movie, and they both said it was the best movie of the year.
Wow.
And then to contrast that, I have some tweets here from a comic book writer named Dan Slott.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of Dan Slott before?
I don't think so, no.
He writes mostly for Marvel Comics now. He was the writer of Spider-Man for about 10 years.
Okay.
He's currently writing Fantastic Four.
Cool.
But Here's what he had to say about
Okay.
the Joker movie. You ready?
Yes.
Quote, watching a dark story about an anti-hero can be captivating. See Breaking Bad, The Shield, many episodes of The Wire. How it's paced, why they make their choices, how much you're willing to empathize with them, and for how long, these things can all be exciting. Agreed?
Yeah.
So far?
Yeah, no, for sure.
But it has to be earned. You can't shorthand it by imitating other better films, i.e. Taxi Driver, King of Comedy.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not paced out well, if the character goes too far, too quickly, why should we continue to be invested in them? Stacking the deck against the character isn't character development. That's just job.
Mm-hmm.
Being dark for dark's sake isn't a theme. Rich equals bad, poor equals good isn't a hot take. Good cinematography, score, and even an excellent performance doesn't fix the meal if the recipe is bad. The most frustrating thing about the Joker movie, there are so many excellent DC comics that dance around the Joker's origins. Any of those, just using the comic pages as storyboards, would have made a far better movie than what they put on the screen. So again, this is a guy, he used to write for DC Comics, but he writes mostly for Marvel now, and he insists that this isn't like a DC versus Marvel thing.
Okay.
But yeah, when I read his tweets, I was like, wow, that's some strong opinions about the Joker movie.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll kind of get, again, more into what he's saying when we talk about the movie itself.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just share those tweets to illustrate there are people with strong opinions about the movie who feel very differently than even like, you know, I just talked with those podcasters or YouTubers. Like, people are praising the movie. Some, like Dan Slott, are really hating on it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because it seems to me anytime, ever since I've been following like movie news and reactions to movies online in the last 10 or 15 years, even when you have like a movie that everyone will like claim is like, you know, the best movie of the year, the best movie ever, this and that, there's always at the very least a small group of people that say, I think you guys are missing something, right? Like I'm Reddit every day, and once in a while I'll come across a post where they'll say like, oh, everyone's praising the Joker movie, but they didn't think about this thing, and here's why the movie is not good. And then you'll have like 550 people upvoting it, basically agreeing with that sentiment. And yeah, I feel like no matter what you do, even like some of the best movies ever made, there will always still be a small group of detractors of people that didn't like the movie. And yeah, I imagine a movie like this is not, you know, if I took my mom to see this movie, I don't think she'd like it very much. Like, it wouldn't be her kind of movie, even though, to be fair, she did like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I was mildly surprised by. But I guess it goes to show, especially a movie like this can definitely have strong reactions on either side, whether they loved it or they hated it, or maybe they're just very concerned about it. Yeah.
And despite the U.S. military being concerned about a mass shooting, and despite Dan Slott not enjoying it at all on Twitter, the movie, when it was released, had the highest opening weekend for any film ever released in October.
Yes.
And just this Friday, it has now become the highest grossing R-rated film of all time globally.
That's right, yeah, worldwide.
We got to emphasize that, because if you look at the domestic, meaning the North American box office, it's actually still in like 8th place for R-rated films.
Yeah.
But if you look at total box office gross around the world, Joker is now the highest rated or grossing R-rated movie.
Yes.
It's now becoming one of the highest grossing DC movies ever made.
Yeah.
So what does this say, Ben the Movie Buff? I've heard some people say, oh, like the movie's doing well because this is the kind of movie people want from DC Comics. Like, you think about Shazam that came out earlier this year, or Aquaman that came out last Christmas.
Yep.
Those are DC Comics movies that are much lighter in tone than this.
Yeah.
But have made, you know, Aquaman ended up making $1 billion.
Yeah,
so,
it did, yeah.
But that's because it had a release in China, which Joker won't get.
Right.
What does it say, the fact that this Joker movie is doing so much better than a movie like Shazam?
Okay, so I think there's a question like that. I feel like it's too simple to just say, oh, there's one specific answer and that's it. I feel like there are a few things at work here. So number one, I think the obvious thing is that it helps when a movie has word of mouth, whether the movie is good or bad. As they say sometimes, they're like, publicity is still publicity, right? If someone talks about like, oh, not liking the Joker movie for blah 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 and whatnot, someone that wasn't planning on going to see it might be more interested now because someone had such a strong reaction, even if they didn't like it. So I think word of mouth helps because I saw it. I saw it like the Monday after it opened. And then after that, like my wife, who wasn't really interested in seeing it at first, she saw that it was getting all this controversy, but also getting some good reviews too. And then she went during a Stars and Stroller event with my son, my 3-month-old son, which for the record, like he can't make sense of like what's going on or whatnot.
They played Joker for Stars and Strollers?
They did, yeah. It was funny. She was telling me, she's like, there were 2 options for the Stars and Stroller events. There was Joker and Hustlers. So you either get a movie about a guy turning into a criminal and is descendant to madness, or you get a movie about strippers trying to play the system. Those are your Stars and Strollers options for a few weeks ago, which I thought was so funny. Anyways, but yeah, so she ended up seeing it because it got good reviews. Then we were hanging out with some of our friends like a week later, and they were hearing about this Joker movie, and they're like, well, what do you think? Like, should we see it? And like I explained to them, I'm like, well, I thought it was really great, but keep in mind, of course, that like it's a dark movie, right? It's not, a light movie. You're like, oh, it's kind of dark. Like, no, it's a very dark, disturbing movie. But even then, they still went to go see it. And I think the people that are going to see this movie, whether they like it or not, they still want to talk about it. And I feel like when a movie gets talked about this much, there are some people that just can't wait until it comes on home video. Like they have to go see it in theaters. So I think the word of mouth helps. I think also the fact that, like I said, on IMDb, it's still at 8.9. It has like 370,000 hits, which is pretty high for a movie that just came out a few weeks ago. But it's still at 8.9. I think it's like at 13 or 14 in the ranking of the IMDb top 250. So I think it has to do with that as well, is that it has, even though, yes, a lot of people have talked about the controversy and some people haven't liked it, from what I can tell, it seems like the majority of people still at the very least liked it. And I got to touch on the fact as well that a lot of the comic book superhero movies that we get are the big extravaganza, like the big like tentpole blockbuster movies, big ensemble cast, and lots of cool visual effects and special effects and this and that. And now here we have this comic book movie that's trying to take more of a realistic approach too, which I think has also gotten some people interested. Because like you were saying earlier, which of course is a conversation for another time, but with some of these directors saying like, oh, comic book movies aren't cinema or whatnot, well, have they seen the Joker? Because even though, like, once again, it's a character that is based on a comic book character, even though it's not based on any specific comics, but it takes a little bit of influence, I'd like to think, because they didn't like create the character out of nowhere. But I think there are a few different things that are working in its favor that have resulted in the big moneymaker that it is, and I feel like it will continue to make a lot of money. Like the one impressive thing was that last weekend when Maleficent, Mistress of Evil came out, that was #1 over Joker. And then this week, I guess with no big new releases or whatnot, Joker reclaimed the #1 spot, and Maleficent went down to #2. So it goes to show people are still talking about this movie. People are still going to see this movie. And yeah, I think there's a few things that are going on here that are making it as financially successful as it is.
So there you go. And frankly, this probably part of this too is that, like, unfortunately, for a lot of comic book characters, Batman is the most popular DC character there is. Mm-hmm. Ergo, anything related to Batman is going to get a whole lot more interest than anything else. So
yeah.
So there you go. Joker, and it's not, we have to be clear, this movie is called Joker, not The Joker.
Yeah.
Apparently there's some other movie that came out a few years ago that was also called Joker.
Right. Yeah.
So if you go on like IMDb or Box Office Mojo, it has Joker brackets 2019. Just to remind you, this is the film that came out this year.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's the highest, it's already, again, highest grossing R-rated film of all time globally. Mm-hmm. It's very divisive among critics, got a lot of weird stuff happening before it even came out.
Yeah.
So we're finally here. We're going to spend our 150th episode actually talking about the Joker movie, or Joker.
Yeah.
So Ben, the movie buff, if you had to summarize the plot of this film in a spoiler for if you had to summarize the plot of this film in a spoiler-free way in a tweet, what would you say?
What's your name?
My name's Arthur.
Well, there's something special about you, Arthur, I can tell. Where you from?
I live right here in the city with my mother. She says I was put here to spread joy and laughter.
What's so funny?
She always tells me to smile and put on a happy face.
Rated R.
So our film takes place in, I believe, the late 70s, and we follow this man named Arthur Fleck. And Arthur Fleck is a guy who is not mentally right in the head. He's disturbed, and unfortunately, he is not treated all that well by other people of Gotham City. And one thing leads to the next, and he eventually kind of has this breakdown that eventually results in him becoming the Joker. And even though the Joker is this character that we know from all sorts of different movies, this is kind of literally explaining his backstory to see why he is the way he is.
So despite all my complaints about the fact that this is not based on any specific comic books,
Yeah.
and we'll get into if this is even meant to be the Joker
Yeah.
that we know from Batman stories,
Mm-hmm.
I would say this is a film that needs to be seen
Yes.
purely just to see where you stand on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is very divisive. Like, as we talked with the critics and with audiences, not everyone's going to enjoy this movie.
Yeah.
And Dan Slott's tweets kind of illustrate
Yeah.
the negativity that people can show towards the film.
Mm-hmm.
It is violent.
Yep.
In terms of like the most violent movies I've ever seen, it's not all that violent. There's really only a couple moments where something violent is happening on screen.
Yeah.
I would say it's mostly rated R for the language and the disturbing content,
Yep.
rather than actual violence.
Absolutely.
But it is fairly disturbing. And the first time I saw the movie, I attended a public event where we were praying the rosary together before seeing the movie, just to like kind of put myself in a spiritually healthy disposition before going into the film.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard one person say on a podcast that you should really have some kind of joy chaser, like do something joyful after watching Joker.
Yeah.
Because if you like watch Joker and then go to bed, it's probably not the best thing for you.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of people say, "Oh, this is a commentary on the world we live in today," even though it is set in 1981.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Well, late 70s, 80s. It's
Well,
close.
yeah, I thought
enough.
late 70s, early 80s, somewhere around there.
But would you agree with that statement that this is a film that should be seen?
Yes, no, I absolutely agree. And now, of course, it being an R-rated movie, to put it in perspective, let's say I was 40 years old and I went to go see this movie, and maybe like my 18-year-old son, for example, who technically is old enough to see R-rated movies, if he was interested in seeing it, and let's say he's still living under my roof and I have some say over what entertainment he consumes, I would say that obviously, like, this is a movie that should be seen by adults, but people maybe who are like 16, 17 years old, even if they have seen some like violent stuff, they're like, oh, I can handle it. I don't know if I would show it to someone who's a little younger and possibly more impressionable, right? I think that's why, like, someone like myself, who I'd like to think I'm strong in my faith and all that, and even though I have temptations and I'm not perfect and all that, I'm not gonna tomorrow wake up and be like, oh, all my beliefs are changed and blah, blah, blah. Like, I think a lot about the movies that I watch, and I thought a lot about Joker as well. So even if someone a bit younger was interested in seeing this movie, I might be more hesitant to show them that, because I feel like this is a movie that, yeah, like you said, like, it's good to be in a spiritually healthy place before you watch this movie, because I think one of the reasons why the movie is controversial is because when you see everything that happens in the movie, there's no clear-cut message of, like, so just so everyone's aware, what Joker did was bad and he shouldn't have done like, it's presented in a bit more of a, you could argue for and against, and I think that's part of what makes it interesting, is that there's no clear-cut, just so everyone's clear. Like, I mean, I know what I believe, and it seems clear to me, but someone who's a bit younger, it's possible that they could watch something like this and maybe get the wrong impression. So I would say it's like, even if you're like your 16 or 17-year-old is like, oh yeah, I want to see it, I say, you take a lot of time to really think about, do you want to show, because even like some of my favorite movies of all time, I wouldn't let like my 16 or 17-year-old son, who's still impressionable, like, I'd wait a little bit longer before I show them, a movie like this.
Which makes the Canadian rating system even more interesting, because it's actually rated 14A here in Canada.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
14-year-olds
Oh,
can go see Joker without an adult.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I would have been able to see this movie 14. I think that would have been too much for me, for my 14-year-old
No,
mind.
sorry. 14A means you have to have an adult with you if you're 14 or younger. Is that right?
I don't think so. I'm just sure, like, as long as you're, I think it's just the... I'm pretty sure it's only 18A. You need to be at least
Right.
18-year-old.
It's been a while since I had to be concerned about if I could get into a 14A movie.
Well, right. Yeah, I think obviously if a toddler goes in and wants to see Joker, it'd be like, no, you're not 14 years old. But if teenagers come in, because there were some teenagers that came to our screening of the Joker, and you could tell because they were laughing at parts that were not funny. So yes, but that goes to show that like they were allowed to see the movie and they were probably not 18 years old.
Yeah. And certainly we've had this conversation before about, a film versus a movie.
Right.
And
Yeah.
this is certainly an artistic film.
Yes.
Like this is less of, like you say, a tentpole blockbuster.
Right.
And more of an artistic piece.
Yes.
I thought about this morning. I was like thinking each scene in Joker could be like its own little short film.
Mm-hmm.
And you could literally have an entire podcast episode. Like this movie could basically start a whole podcast series where you have one episode where you break down each scene.
Yeah.
Because the way it's shot and the way it's lit and the way it's framed and the way it's the scores and the way the performances and the way it's presented, there's so much you can dig into.
Absolutely.
And it truly is a character study.
Yes.
Because Joaquin Phoenix is in every scene.
That's right.
And the movie is told from his point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So we could be here for hours kind of diving into each particular moment of the movie and what that means for his character. And, like there's the stairs and like the role the stairs have in the movie.
That's right.
There's I think the people who are just kind of writing this off as a terrible movie, like Dan Slott, not to throw him under the bus.
Yeah.
I think there are some merits here.
Yep, absolutely.
And especially when you're looking at it from like a filmmaking perspective. Because this is a Joker movie in name only.
Mm-hmm.
You could easily remove the references to Gotham City and certain characters, and this could just be a film.
Okay.
I honestly look at who the character is and the story that's told, ignoring the fact that it's not really based on the comics anyway. That's kind of a new idea. I'm like, there's very little about this character that reminds me of the Joker.
Right.
And it has a lot to do with the fact that this is meant to be an origin, right? So he's getting towards being, but even when he gets there, I'm like, this doesn't really feel like the Joker to me.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I was like, this movie, this film,
yes,
is using the intellectual property of the Joker to get people like me who would not go see, like if this movie, again, if you released a version of this film called The Clown,
right, yeah,
and it was more or less the exact same movie except you just cut out any of the comic book references, I would have zero interest in seeing that movie because it would just look dark and depressing and sad, and I'd be like, that is not something I want to look like I want to do with my time.
It would not make the money it's made, that's for sure. It would make a lot less.
But because they stuck the Joker name on it and they threw in Gotham City, they got me and a whole bunch of other people interested, and that I'm kind of annoyed with.
Okay.
Do you feel the same way?
Not really. I think here's how I feel about it. Because remember, like I read some comic books. I haven't read that many of like the DC or Marvel comics. I've read more, like I've said before, like Archie comics and Walking Dead. That's my thing. Those are the comics that I read. But I think, see, it's interesting. I feel like there's a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario here. If you take a lot of scenes and stories from the comic books regarding the Joker and you make that into a movie, you have comic book fans who understandably can be very critical, right? And they'll say, well, I don't like how they did this in the movie because in the comic book they did this different way and I thought it was much better, right? But if you do your own thing where, as you say, kind of in name only, you take the Joker, Gotham City, and also Bruce Wayne and Thomas Wayne, and you bring them into the mix, they're able to have more flexibility because they basically kind of came up with their own story, which I think is also kind of interesting because it means, yes, they take stuff that we're familiar with, but they do something different with it so that even hardcore comic book fans don't know. I mean, we know that he becomes the Joker by the end, but when it comes to like specific plot points and certain things that are going to happen in the story, there's a little more to wonder about because we haven't seen them in any comic books before. So for me, I'm kind of interested. Like I don't mind if it's one or the other. I think like each have their pros and cons for why they should be done in a certain way. And I think like it's interesting given the fact that a lot of the comic book movies we've seen over the last 15, 20 years have borrowed heavily from actual comics. That it's kind of cool that this movie comes along and you know and basically asks the question like, what is Joker's backstory? Well, here's one idea that we have. and this is the one that we've been able to look at, think about, and talk about with each other.
It almost feels to me as if they literally wrote this script for again just a sad clown movie, and they're like, hey, like what if we just color over this with the Gotham City Joker intellectual property, and boom, here's our movie now.
And another thing too to keep in mind is that I think what's kind of cool is, even though the movie very much from the sound of it is like kind of it's a standalone movie and kind of does its own thing and has some references to the bigger picture that's going on and to stuff that we're familiar with, like Gotham City and the Wayne family and all that. I think, imagine if you know, I would venture to guess that a lot of people that have gone to see this movie have seen Batman, have seen Dark Knight, have seen Suicide Squad. Now, those are different interpretations of the Joker, but I feel like kind of having that knowledge of like how we've seen the Joker before in other iterations can kind of make it all the more interesting to see what this Joker is like, because there were certain moments, certain things that the Joker does where I'm like, that reminds me of this Joker and that reminds me of that Joker. And I feel like you'd have a bit of a different experience if you just went in only knowing that, like, oh, I heard that Joker was a villain in the Batman universe. That's all I know. I haven't seen any movies. I haven't read any comics. Someone literally just told me this fact, and now I'm going into the movie. But I feel people that have seen the Joker before on page or on screen have a bit more to process, because now they're going to see another version of this character. And I find that interesting, too, because there's a lot more going on, I feel, when you have all these other iterations to take into consideration.
Before we go any farther, we should say Joaquin Phoenix, the fact that he's in every scene, that's hard to be kind of the main point of interest or the main focal point of every single scene. He does an incredible job carrying this movie.
He does.
If he doesn't get nominated for awards, I'll be surprised.
Yeah, I think he will. Whether he will win or not, I think is another a scenario entirely. I was trying to think of like other performances that have dealt with like either like dark characters or violent characters and whatnot. And to be honest, I don't think there are that many. Like the first that came to mind for me was Anthony Hopkins won for his performance as Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. Now, to be fair, he's only in like 15-20 minutes of the movie, and there's still some dark stuff there, but I don't think it holds a candle compared to the transformation that we see Joaquin Phoenix go through in the Joker. So I'm voting for him for the best leading actor category and for in Oscar season.
Well, see, maybe you can help me. I couldn't think of many other movies where there's like one actor in every single scene, because usually even in most movies where there's like a main character, there's usually at least one or two or three scenes that include other characters.
Yeah, no, there are some. Like I think the name of the movie, I watched this movie years ago at film school called Looking for Mr. Goodbar. I don't recommend it exactly, but I do remember like Diane Keaton is the main actress in that movie, and I think the film professor mentioned that he's like, Diane Keaton's in every single scene of this movie. And there are some movies, there aren't that many, but yeah, there is like a small group of movies where you have certain actors that are in every scene of the movie.
It actually works to the film's benefit to have Arthur in every scene, because it further illustrates the fact that we are seeing things from his point of view.
Yeah, exactly.
And it creates the kind of first-person narration almost. You know, you read some novels that are in first-person narration, so you're hearing everything described, and you're seeing events described from that character's point of view. Mm-hmm. And you don't get to see the full picture. You're getting like a biased look at the world.
Exactly.
And I think that really works to this movie's benefit, because what that does is it allows you to kind of enter into the psychology of Arthur.
Yeah.
And you reach a point where you're not sure if what's happening on screen is real or not.
Exactly.
And that brings you into the psychology of that character, because he reaches a point where he doesn't know what's real or not.
Yeah.
And I don't know, any movie or film that can bring about that kind of visceral reaction in you, that's pretty impressive. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, no, I absolutely. I think that was the really one of my favorite parts about the movie, was the fact that, without going into spoilers, early on in the movie, there are certain parts where you know for sure it's not, like what you're seeing is like just someone imagining, right? But then as the movie goes on, it starts to get a little more complicated, right? I mean, there are certain movies where, like, oh, maybe it's a mystery and we're not sure what's real and what isn't. And then sometimes at the end, they're like, oh, here's the definitive answer to all your questions, right? This, that, now you know everything. That's great. But I feel like a movie like this is more fascinating and more interesting when you don't know whether it was all real, part of it was real, part of it was fake, or whether the whole thing was just him imagining. It's hard to know. It's hard to know exactly what's going on. And I think that's where the whole where a lot of discussion comes from. It reminds me of like the end of Inception, which I won't spoil, but they do in such a they do it in such a way so that you feel like, was it this or that? And you're not sure. If they cut, for anyone who's seen Inception, you'll know, if they cut like 20 seconds earlier, you'd know for sure that it was this.
Listen,
and not
he
that.
saw their faces, okay? I don't want to think.
No, but I'm just saying though that it goes to show that you give just a little bit more to make people wonder what's going on, and then that way, they're left having to figure out the movie without having like a definitive answer. Because sometimes it's a little boring when it's like, oh, what was this thing all about? Oh, it's this. That's it. That's all you need to know. Moving on.
And people are actually mad at both Todd Phillips, the director / writer, and Joaquin Phoenix for this movie because they are intentionally going out of their way to not explain anything. They are very much promoting the idea that, isn't it great that when you put art out, you make art and you put it out there and it's open for people to interpret differently. Because we'll get in this in spoilers, but I feel like there's things they are saying in this movie. They're making statements about things, and it's almost cowardly to then go and say, oh, like, it can be interpreted however you want. Like, we're not trying to sell you anything.
Right. Okay.
When it's like, all right, guys, come on. Like,
Yeah.
we're all adults here. You're clearly trying to make some strong messages here that are clearly related to things that are actually happening in the world right now. So instead of being like little like, ooh, aren't we artistic? Just go out and say what you're doing because, anyway, I can't talk about it anymore without spoilers.
Yeah.
Part of seeing the movie entirely from Arthur's point of view, it seems as though everyone in Gotham City is just a huge jerk.
Yeah. It's so frustrating.
And that, I think, if we're to believe that everyone is actually as jerky as they are presented in the film,
Yeah.
I think the biggest message you can take away from this movie, and this is no spoilers, is that we just need to be kinder to people.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Because this movie shows essentially the worst case scenario that what happens when, if, it's one thing if you're mean to one person on the street, but imagine if that same person then gets treated poorly by 7 other people.
Yeah.
And imagine that person who's being bullied or abused is suffering with mental health.
Yeah.
Then that just becomes an even worse scenario that gets worse and worse as things go on.
Yeah.
And so it's a real cautionary tale about how we should treat other people.
I agree. That was and I mean, I probably got this from someone else who reviewed the movie. But yeah, that's exactly how I felt too watching the movie, is that, you know what, I know what's going on in my life and how I'm feeling today and probably how I'm going to feel tomorrow. And I like to think like, I'm doing pretty well. I have my own struggles and problems and whatnot, but I don't feel like I'm one bad day away from becoming a character like the Joker. But you never know, like the other other people and like the what's going on in their lives, right? Like whether they're hurting, whether they have an addiction in some way, whether they're being abused or bullied or whatnot. And I think it goes to show that like, guys, come on, just be kind to one another, be helpful, because sometimes, and I mean, I like to think that I'm not one to be like actively like mean and hurtful to other people. I'm not perfect, right? But I feel like all it takes is for one fragile person to be picked on by just a few people, maybe more, and it can be really difficult for some people. And I'd like to think that not everyone, of course, is going to from that pain, become someone like the Joker. But I think it goes to show that, like this could be the worst case scenario, and hopefully it makes you think twice about the way that you treat people. Even if you're like, oh, hey, I have a funny joke, but maybe it's kind of hurtful, maybe it's a bit too much. Like, think twice about certain things that you might say. Because I know I've had some people in my life that will kind of like tease me about something, and like I laugh as kind of an automatic response, but then sometimes like later on I think about it and I'm like, I don't know if the person should have said that. I think that was probably not the best thing for them to do. But I think sometimes we kind of live in this world, right, where it's just like, say whatever you want, like, oh, everyone gets offended, so we should just not get offended at anything ever and just say what we want. Like, no, I think we need to be careful with our words and careful with how we treat people. We got to help people because If you don't, like it could really be tragic for some people that need that help of others.
One of the points of controversy leading up to this film was knowing that it was going to address mental illness.
Yeah.
Because as we've talked about in previous episodes, the Joker, throughout his history in the comics and other media, has his portrayals have represented the understanding of the time about how mental health works.
Right.
You know, there was a time where they could just say the Joker's crazy, and therefore we don't have to explain why he does things or why he kills people because he's crazy, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the last 60, 70 years, there's been a lot of work done to understand mental illness and how to address mental health conditions. So I would go as far to say this is the most realistic interpretation of mental illness that's been portrayed in any comic book movie.
Yes.
And certainly when it comes to the Joker,
Yeah.
you know, the Arthur Fleck in the movie, he openly admits to having clinical depression.
Yeah.
He's seeing a social worker, not a psychologist or a therapist, but a social worker for his condition. And he also has this, I didn't think it was real. Like, he has this involuntary laughter that happens in the movie.
Right.
I thought that was just something they made up. But as I learned after the fact, there is actually a very rare condition called involuntary emotional expression disorder.
Yeah.
What that means is that an individual with this affliction essentially has inappropriate emotional reactions to things. So in Arthur's case, he laughs uncontrollably at times when he's actually not happy.
Yep.
He's actually scared or upset or whatever.
Yeah.
And that actually gets him in a lot of trouble in the film.
Yes.
And there's also suggestions of unresolved trauma in his life, possibly post-traumatic stress disorder. He certainly seems to have a type of mood disorder that possibly leads to delusions.
Yeah.
So I was very impressed that this movie was willing to go there to actually like address mental illness directly and to, instead of just saying, ooh, the Joker's kind of crazy,
Yeah.
to say, here are these afflictions that are real-world mental health conditions that people watching the movie might be experiencing. And I'm just putting this out there. You know, I listened to a psychologist who does the Arkham Sessions, which is a podcast I've talked about before.
Yeah.
I listened to her talk about the movie, and she made a point to say that people with mental health conditions are actually often the victims of violence.
Yeah.
They are not perpetrators of violence. So if you go see this movie and you're afraid that people with depression are going to go and kill you, that's not the right way to think about it. Like, aggression that leads to violence is typically the result of deep-seated anger.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because someone has, and if anything, as I just said, people who are experiencing clinical depression or unresolved trauma are often victims of violence. And I've known people in my own life who are suffering with clinical depression and have essentially put themselves in situations where they essentially become victims of violence.
Yeah.
So I know this is a real thing that happens, and I just want to emphasize that again, because I know not everyone is I'm not an expert in this at all.
Yeah.
But I know there's people who know very little about mental illness, mental health. So if you are one of those people who are concerned about encountering people in the street that might injure you, know that they're more likely to become a victim of violence than a perpetrator.
Yeah, I think it'd be a bit of a mistake to see a movie like this and be like, oh, anyone that has any kind of issue that's, you know, in the same neighborhood as the one that Arthur Fleck has, that like, oh, watch out because, yeah, they're the perpetrators of violence. Like, this is just, remember, this is just one movie, and this is the story that they're telling. And, yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is like that.
And while it is fairly light on the comic book inspirations, it does take its inspiration from The Killing Joke, which presents a potential past for the Joker,
Right.
in which he's trying to become a stand-up comedian. That's pretty much the only
That's right. Yeah.
elements of anything comic book related that serves as inspiration for the film.
Yeah.
I have yet to see Taxi Driver or The King of Comedy, but is it true that the Joker movie kind of plays out a lot like those films?
Yeah, so funny you should mention that. So I saw Taxi Driver years and years ago when I was like really getting intensely interested in film. I did watch Taxi Driver, which I liked. I thought was fine, but it definitely, there are a number of scenes that kind of reminded me of Taxi Driver in this movie. I still have yet to see King of Comedy, but I'm after hearing about how much it influenced Joker, I definitely want to see it sooner than later. So probably sometime next month I'll sit down and watch it. But yes, there were definitely some influences from Scorsese, which I know some some reviewers found to be a bit distracting. That it's like, oh, we get it, it's like a Martin Scorsese movie, like Taxi Driver or King of Comedy. But yes, there are definitely some relations there, especially with the fact that King of Comedy has this kind of unsuccessful comedian played by Robert De Niro who's trying to get onto the show, which of course should sound very familiar to the situation that's happening in Joker. And then of course it's a big kind of in Joker Easter egg that Robert De Niro ends up playing the talk show host Murray Franklin in Joker. That is the one that is successful and has been being watched by so many people.
Martin Scorsese ended up backing out of being a producer on Joker.
Yeah.
I guess he got too busy with The Irishman.
Right, yeah.
Which is, I think, on Netflix now.
Say in a few weeks. It's coming out in November sometime.
Yeah. So it is interesting to see that he had, I guess, his fingerprints are over the movie. And
yeah.
I have yet to see either of those films myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just to bring things into anime for a moment. There's an anime that's on right now called My Hero Academia, which is about a high school for superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's received a lot of criticism from the hardcore anime fandom because it has a lot of similarities to Naruto, which is like an anime that aired like a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I've never seen Naruto, so because I don't understand Naruto, I don't see those comparisons.
Yeah.
It's like my first exposure to this kind of story is through My Hero Academia.
Yep.
And I feel like that is the same experience that I've had with Joker because I haven't seen those other films that it supposedly rips off or takes a lot of inspiration from.
Yeah.
I'm experiencing it for the first time through Joker.
Yep.
So, and again, I don't have those issues with it. If it is a huge ripoff, please let us know. And again, I guess Scorsese was involved at some point with this, so it's not. He was aware of the influence, so it's not like he has been robbed in that sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think it's time to go into the spoilerverse because a lot of what we want to say about this movie are specific to events that happen in the film, or how certain characters are portrayed in the film. So, if what we've said so far has intrigued you to go see the film, go see it. Like I said, it's worthwhile seeing just so that you can have an opinion on the movie because even though the people involved are insistent that they aren't trying to say anything, there's a lot to be said.
Yeah.
So, are you ready to go into the spoilerverse?
Let's do it.
Okay, my biggest complaint with Joker is how they portray Thomas Wayne.
Okay.
In every other piece of Batman media I've ever seen, Thomas Wayne has been portrayed as like a symbol of hope, as a medical doctor who, even though he came from money, like his family, like they're historically rich. Like he didn't get rich being a doctor. He kind of came into his money.
Yeah.
And every piece of Batman media I've seen up until now, Thomas Wayne has always been portrayed as a good man, as someone who like set an example for Bruce to follow. And in a lot of Batman stories, Bruce Wayne, and playing up his like socialite kind of like playboy persona, he ends up letting people down because he's tarnishing Thomas's name.
Right.
So you can imagine I was very frustrated when I watched this movie, and I'm like, who is this Thomas Wayne? Because he is a jerk. He's insensitive, and he's like calling working class people clowns, punching Arthur in the face, and then there's all this suggestion of a possible affair.
Right.
I was very much angry with how I felt like this was a huge disservice to that character. And I actually heard one person say that they loved it because like, oh, this is a realistic interpretation of a rich guy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, you have your own bias and I have my bias.
Yeah.
But for you, as a person who has some attachment to Batman, were you at all concerned or frustrated with how they portrayed Thomas?
Not really. I think the reason why is because I think we need to remember. And it's great now we can talk about spoilers here because I get into more detail. So one of the questions about the movie, of course, is: did all of this happen? Did the whole event of Arthur Fleck turning into the Joker, going on to Murray Franklin, killing the people that he did, shooting Murray Franklin on air, and then everything that happened after that, like, did all of that happen? Or was it just a story that he was telling at the end of the movie when he says, I have a joke, but you wouldn't get it? So I think we need to remember, of course, that as we were saying earlier, with Arthur Fleck being our protagonist and being in every single scene, we're seeing the movie through his eyes, right? And I think that was one of the things that my brother and I, when we saw the movie, we talked about is we're like, we don't remember like Thomas Wayne being such a jerk, and yet in this movie he feels like such a jerk, and we were wondering maybe that's because even though Arthur Fleck, even though he becomes the Joker, and we know the Joker's a villain, in this story for this movie, he's our protagonist, right? Like he's still the one that we're following all this way. And I think that frustration is probably well deserved though, because this is one character telling their story and seeing another character that we don't associate with being as cruel as he seems to be. But now like we don't really like him that much because we're seeing him through the Joker's eyes. So I wonder if maybe like, yeah, for me, I think that's the reason why they made him that way, is that whether that's just, Joker's perspective or whether the whole story was made up. I think the whole point is that, he's supposed to look like this because to Arthur Fleck, he's an antagonist, even if the things that we see exactly didn't play out that way. Because you know how sometimes, for example, I might tell a story about when I was a kid, this thing happened. And then my dad, who, was older at the time, he might say, well, no, actually, it didn't happen that way. It happened this way. I might remember it differently. And I wonder if maybe that's part of the, a decision made in the movie was that, certain characters like don't seem to be very helpful or kind to Arthur, but we got to wonder, like, was Thomas Wayne such a jerk, or is that just the way that Arthur Fleck remembers him? So I think that's why, like, we're really supposed to maybe not empathize, but kind of feel bad for Arthur, because it's like, what friends does he have? Even his mother, for a while, we feel like his mother is his only friend, or is like the only person that's kind to him. And then when we realize the whole truth about that, then it's like, was there anyone that was like on Arthur's side?
Sometimes these artsy movies kind of frustrate me because they like make things so loosey-goosey, and then I get the whole idea of like once art's out in the world, it's open to interpretation, but the artist should still have a message or a meaning they're trying to convey.
Right. Yeah.
So the way this movie plays out, it ends with him being in a mental hospital.
Yep.
Presumably Arkham.
Yeah.
And you're right. There's one way you can read the movie to suggest that the entire film was just his imagination.
Yeah.
And that none of it actually happened.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense because there's a lot of things in the film that you can really nitpick about and like, really? Come on.
Yeah, like that happened.
Like, I would say it's almost comedic in how awful everyone is to Arthur in the movie.
Yeah.
Like the woman on the bus.
Yeah.
Chastising him for talking to her child.
Yeah.
Or even the way Alfred, I mean, I get it. Like you see,
right.
you see this stranger sticking his hands inside your, the child's mouth. But Alfred would have more couth in handling that situation than the Alfred that's in the film.
Yeah.
Or, even with Thomas Wayne, like the scene in the bathroom, like if it's the Thomas Wayne I know from every their version of Batman stories, he would have handled that way different than the Thomas we see here.
Yeah.
And it almost becomes, it's like, it almost if we're to read and to say, oh, all this is actually happening to Arthur and he's just a guy who the system has let down and everyone's a jerk. It becomes comedic almost as how bad, a bunch of teenagers steal his sign and then smash him in the face and kick him with it. It's like, like, why? Like, surely the city isn't that evil.
Yeah, here's kind of here's one guess about the movie for me, because on the one hand it could be like, oh, he just imagined the whole thing, but then you gotta wonder, like, is that there's just something that doesn't feel entirely fulfilling about the fact that you go through this whole journey and it's like, guess what, it was all in his head. I feel like it's a bit of a cop-out. I like that could be a possibility, but for me, I think what's more interesting is that everything that you see in the movie, or most of what you see in the movie, happened. There are some things that I feel like are definite imaginings, right, that didn't happen. Him imagining being on the Murray Franklin show at the beginning and Murray Franklin pulling him over and saying, oh, that's so great that you take care of your mother. That was obviously our first indication of like, so that didn't happen.
I actually, the first time I saw the movie, I thought it had actually, he was like remembering an occasion where he'd come onto the show. I didn't realize that it was an imagination until the second time I watched the movie.
Oh, right, of course, yeah, because then there's no like, remember me? I was on your show once, and he's like, I don't remember you. Yeah, there's nothing like that, so that's right. That was definitely an imagination. Him being with the girl, that was obviously like an imagination too.
That was a huge shock when I was
me too. I honestly, I didn't see it coming, and I can't believe, even though like there's that dramatic moment where he goes through her door, like opens up the door and then like kisses her, and yet for some reason, like I'm just like, that probably happened. And then later on, it's like, no, wait, that didn't happen. Oh man. And it's such a letdown because once again, like there's another like potential ally who is not like, once again, that's just him imagining things. So you have that. And then of course, I think towards the end when, someone crashes into the cop car that's taking him away, and he gets out and he's on the hood and he has his arms stretched out and everyone's like cheering him on and whatnot. Obviously Bruce Wayne's parents getting killed, like we know that happened in the Gotham universe, but him being praised by everyone and then it cutting to him being in Arkham, I know that like that his happy ending probably didn't happen, but I think it's more interesting to read the movie where most of what happened did happen, even if that's him remembering things a certain way. For example, like Thomas Wayne, maybe he wasn't so much of an a-hole to him, but that's how he remembers it. And then I think there are some scenes that flat out did not happen. But I think it makes the movie more interesting when you're like, I think that happened, but did that happen? Who knows? Like it's back and forth with what is real, what is not.
Yeah, and I think this is where my attachment to the Batman universe really like took me out of the movie, because there's one moment where Thomas Wayne's on TV and he's like, oh, all these people, they don't understand, and they have it against us who have worked hard for what we have. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Thomas Wayne would never say that, because again, he inherited his money. He has enough common sense to understand that he became wealthy not because of something he did, but because he inherited family wealth and he worked hard at becoming a doctor. Yeah. So like for the Thomas Wayne I know, and I just can't get over that, would not say it that way, or he wouldn't talk like that.
So what do you think of the interpretation, like the one that I kind of came up with, about the fact that this is how Arthur Fleck views him? Like, do you think that's like justification for like why he would seem to be different? Like, why would he seem to be cruel?
But then you have all the protesters in the movie who are like saying, screw Thomas Wayne or whatever. So either that's also an imagination of Arthur, where he's like imagining that all these people are on his side and hating on Thomas Wayne, because it appears in the movie that he actually goes on TV and actually says those things, and that actually generates a lot of angry people in the city. Which leads to like one of the things I'm like, okay, you're clearly trying to make some commentary on like the 1% here. Right. You're trying to say, here's the 1% who don't understand normal people, and they're rich and selfish and awful people, and you have all of us and the 99% who are on the working class. Mm-hmm. And to me, it feels as though Todd Phillips is basically just using Thomas Wayne as like his scapegoat for the 1%, and basically saying, here's everyone, all that 1%ers that we hate who are terrible human beings, let's just slap Thomas Wayne into that position for this movie.
I wonder too, though, if it's also like a commentary on politics. And I mean, this is another discussion for another day, but I've noticed, especially with social media and with TV, that sometimes you know how they say like, oh, news stations like should be objective in the news that they report, right? This thing happened, here's how someone feels about it. But yeah, like, as you just said there, that it seems like a lot of times like people can very much like tweak things in such a way so that a person who might actually be like a good political candidate, if they don't agree with their views or whatnot, might turn them into something that they're not, and might get certain people having different opinions about someone because we don't like that they stand for this, so therefore we're going to try and make them look as bad as possible. I wonder if that could also be a reading into the movie, that maybe Thomas Wayne I even think of like Thomas Wayne in Batman Begins, right, and seeing like what a good, loving, kind father he was, and I feel like that's what Thomas Wayne is supposed to be. But once again, in this version, that maybe like we're seeing just the things that I think are kind of upsetting other people, and how really someone might be like the best political candidate, but maybe, like they have all these great ideas, and there's just one thing that maybe gets a group of people ticked off. Like they're not happy, they're angry with what's going on, and they're gonna riot in the streets. I wonder if maybe that's another kind of reading of it too.
And to be fair, also, if you think of like Batman Begins, that you see Thomas Wayne through like Bruce Wayne's flashbacks, so you're seeing it from like the perspective of the son. So maybe perhaps, I don't know, to throw them a bone, maybe the way that Thomas is portrayed there is a little, rose tinted because it's the son reflecting on his late father.
That's right. Yeah, because really, it's like, are there any flaws with Thomas Wayne and Batman Begins? Like, not really. He's basically perceived to be like this good father who's there for his son, and the whole, why do we learn to fall so we can pick ourselves up again, right? It's like, oh man, he seems like such a good father. But yeah, I think that was kind of my reading into why some of these characters seem to be as cruel as they are, is because we're not getting an accurate representation. We're getting Arthur's Arthur's perspective on them.
Because here's the thing. I reached a point in this movie where I started thinking like cinema sins, because there are a lot of like things that happen in the movie that don't make sense.
Right.
For example, when he's on the Murray Franklin show and he admits to killing those guys, they keep the show going.
Yeah.
And Murray keeps poking him for more. It's like, what you should do as soon as he does that, you stop the show and you arrest the guy. Or security takes him away or something. I don't know what they were thinking to keep that conversation going. And then Murray, and he just provokes him. It's like, this man has just admitted to murdering 3 people, and you're going to be like, oh, you think you're funny? Like, I'm just like,
yeah, that's right.
Use your
keep
head,
on talking.
man.
But of course, once again, like, how cinematic is that like, imagine if they did it the realistic way, where he's like, yeah, I killed those people on the subway. Oh, and then they just stop the taping and then they arrest him. Like, so, and if I may, like, I knew when he's practicing the routine where, like, he points the gun at himself and you're like, oh, he's going to kill himself. But you're like, he's not going to do that. And then you realize, like, I was like, oh, crap. He's going to shoot Murray on his own show. To watch that happen, I knew what was going to happen, but the way that they slowly like stretched that scene out like a rubber band when it came to tension and making things like more and more uncomfortable, and him saying like, you get what you deserve, and shooting him, I almost audibly gasped at that scene. I knew what was going to happen, but it was horrifying to watch it slowly unravel and knowing that was going to be the end result.
Yeah, the problem is when you make a movie like this and you're intentionally making everything so realistic, when there's moments like that where it stops, where you're like, okay, this wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
It just flops, because you're like, okay, you're trying to present, again, they're trying to like suck away a lot of the fantastical elements of the Joker as a comic book character and tell a realistic, grounded story, to include elements of just poor logic for the sake of, being more cinematic. For me, that takes me out of the story.
Yeah, but it's interesting, though, too, because I feel like there are, like, and I'm sure, like, CinemaSins and other people online have done the same thing, too, where even there are some realistic movies where, like, they're so after realism, but they still, like, will change certain things in the story because it's more cinematic, because it's more interesting, right? Like, Braveheart's a notorious example where it's like, oh, man, Braveheart's an amazing movie. I love Braveheart, but a lot of history buffs are like, oh, Braveheart is so historically inaccurate. There's this and that. But it's like, if you did the historically accurate version, do you think that would have been better than the movie we got? I'm not so sure. So I think little things like that I'm willing to forgive, because I was so invested in the character and the story, that if you cut that interview off too quickly, it's like, okay, well then I guess the movie's kind of over. But I like that. Like, I'm willing to forgive the fact that, like, oh, the cops just didn't like arrest him then and there. That, like, we still had to see that whole interview.
Those cops are terrible. There's so much evidence. They should have easily taken him into custody. Be like, oh, we need to ask you some questions. Oh, we tried calling your apartment. Just take the guy into custody. Like, the city has a record for him showing his mental health history and his previous history of being hospitalized. Like, there's clearly enough evidence to go off of to at least take him into custody and put him under questioning. The fact that they just keep letting him go.
Yeah. Here's I think the way that you defend that is. The movie, while the movie might not be completely entirely realistic, it's one of those movies where the setting is realistic. I mean, except for the fact, like, it's Gotham City, but like Gotham City is very much like modeled after like New York City and I guess other places like that. Is that the setting, the fact that it's not a movie big on special effects or like fantastical elements, the setting is more or less realistic, but the way that the actual story is told, the actual events and whatnot, that's where things get kind of loosey-goosey, because of the fact that Arthur Fleck is our narrator, more or less, because he's arguably the one telling the story.
He just walked out of arguing with that case file. Like, there were other staff that just watched him run by.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm like, come on, how is this guy? And that's the other thing. I heard these 2 guys complain about the movie. They said the Joker is smart, whether he's mentally unbalanced or not. He's actually a very smart individual. Arthur Fleck is a bumbling idiot that just and again, if we're to read the events of the film as they happen, as he presents them to us, he just kind of stumbles his way into things with not a lot of challenge or struggle. And it's like, oh yeah, I killed these 3 guys, and I killed this guy in my apartment. Like, he just does these things, seemingly by accident often, and that was one of the things that made me hard for me to accept him as the Joker,
right?
Because I'm like, this is just a fool stumbling his way through life, wearing the makeup. But I'm guessing, but you're not jumping on the train with me here. You're like, whatever.
Once again, like, I think, like, it's another interpretation of the character. We're also seeing, like, the character. I mean, I'd venture to guess. I think I read somewhere online that, like, all the events that we see in the movie, if they are more or less real, they take place over like a month or 2, right? They take place over. It's not just a few days. Like, there's a fair amount of time that passes, and that maybe that's something that the more he gets, the more he becomes the Joker and becomes a criminal and whatnot, like that maybe he does get smarter along the way. But it at the end of the day, it's one of those things that like I wasn't, and maybe it's because like I'm not coming from the critical comic book perspective of like, well, he should be like this, that if anything, like I'm seeing one interpretation. And yeah, it didn't bother me that he was, that he was not this like really clever criminal, not yet at least. So yeah, it didn't bug me.
So what's your take on the Thomas Wayne Penny Fleck relationship?
That I thought that was super interesting, because you have Penny saying like, oh, things aren't, things haven't been, they've been less than ideal. But of course, Thomas Wayne will help us. And I kept on wondering, I'm like, wow, like Thomas, like she keeps on bringing up Thomas pretty frequently. And then hearing this news of like, oh, that apparently, they were intimate, right? And that maybe like Arthur Fleck and Bruce Wayne are half brothers. I was like, wow. And to be honest, like I'd never heard of that before. So I'm like, that's kind of interesting. But then I even liked that they took it one step further, and by saying that it's like, oh no, like, Penny has mental problems as well. And she was just making that stuff up. So I kind of like the fact that there was this, you weren't sure what to trust in the movie, right? They present you with something and you're like, okay, well, I guess I have no choice but to believe it. And then later on, it's like, well, no, here's a reason not to believe it. So I felt going back and forth had me questioning everything that I saw.
Yeah, because I think by the time he finds the photo with like TW on the back,
right,
it actually like makes a strong case to suggest that Thomas Wayne set it up and kind of like had her like hospitalized for not actually having a condition. It was all like made up.
Right. Yeah.
But again, this is like through the lens of Arthur's narration. Like he crumples up the photo and he, at that point he's murdered Penny, and he's like, well, this doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Like I've heard a lot of people say like he becomes Joker when he murders his mother. Right. It's like that's when like the huge change happens.
Yeah.
And I like the way that they play that out, like to not give you a definitive answer as to did Thomas Wayne cheat on his wife with this woman or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helps me like enter into Arthur's kind of headspace of like feeling disoriented, not knowing what's real or not. Like that was probably the best example of that.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
But again, I'd like to believe that it's actually a case where she has the mental health condition.
Right.
Because I just can't get behind this whole Thomas Wayne is a jerk kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Something I wanted to bring up that I actually thought was great from a storytelling perspective is, so it seems to me, and I guess it depends on the movie, but I feel like there are a lot of movies where you have, and sometimes I think these movies are referred to as being episodic, where you have like a character and you have like their mission. Here's what they're going to do. Here's what they're after. And then like something happens, right? But sometimes you have little things happening where it doesn't have that much of an impact on the story. Like it happened maybe because the idea for the one scene itself was good. Maybe it was a funny scene. Maybe like it just kind of shows this one character trait, or that's it. That's all. Sometimes there are certain scenes that I feel like just don't have much of an impact on the story. And some, especially with movies that run a bit longer than they should. And you wonder, like, could this have been cut? Could this movie have been trimmed down a bit? And I have to praise Joker for the fact that there were so many scenes that I felt like all it did was it either built on Arthur's character or it moved the story forward. It had some impact towards the end, right? So, for example, at the beginning, he's spinning the sign around. The sign gets stolen, and then he kind of gets attacked by those kids, which of course goes to show like how unfortunate is it that he's being treated like this by other people. And then later on, of course, he goes to his boss, who says like, oh, where did the sign go? I don't think the kid stole it, but maybe you stole it, which of course is an unfortunate double standard. But then his coworker gives him the gun. That same gun he's holding on to that later on falls out when he's doing a dance at the hospital. He gets fired because of that gun, but then uses that gun later on. And I just love that it's not like, oh, the one scene at the beginning is just to show that like, oh, the kids are mean to Arthur. Like, one thing leads to the next, and one scene builds off of another scene. And I just love that there are no scenes that feel like, oh, you could have taken it out and the movie would have worked fine without it. I feel like every scene is so important to show this character's descent into madness.
Towards the end of my first viewing of the movie, when it gets to the point where the whole town's kind of protesting, and there's this riot going on, I started to feel very uncomfortable because I said, what is this movie trying to say?
Yeah.
Because it felt to me as if they were making a statement, advocating. They're saying, if you feel like things aren't going the way they should be, the right way to essentially bring your issues into the public sphere is to go out and riot.
Right.
And to have this huge protest, and I was like, no, and I was horrified by that, and the fact that the Joker gets up and they're like praising him on top of the cop car.
Yeah.
I was like, this is a and again, they're choosing to not put their views out there for the audience.
Yeah.
But it's pretty hard not to look at that part of the movie and say, yeah, they're trying to make a case for people to rise up and riot, which for the world we live in right now, especially things that are happening like China, it's problematic because I don't believe personally that rioting in the streets like that is the best way to actually see positive change in the world.
Right. I think the way that I looked at that, like coming back to the whole cautionary tale, was that, you know, like Joker is one of, I would say, like one of the most horrifying movies I've ever seen, and not in like a horror movie way where it's like, oh, there's tension and then, oh, there's a jump scare, and like, oh, like the design of the creature or the monster was scary. It was more so like, how scary was it to see this person who is already not right in the head, having some mental issues, and seeing how poorly he was treated by other people and seeing where that led him. And yes, at the end, like when you see like the shot of him like up on the hood of a car with his arms stretched out and everyone's like cheering, they're like, yeah, and like, yeah, you get this sense. It's like, it feels like the Joker's victorious in what he was trying to do. But then of course you see him in presumably Arkham, kind of telling the story. So we're like, did that happen or didn't that happen? I'm guessing I don't think it happened, but I think that's how he imagined it going down. I think if anything, it's a cautionary tale to show that, you know, looking at that should be scary, should be uncomfortable, because see where he was and see like what led him. And I mean, yes, he still had to make a whole bunch of decisions himself, but he had a lot of people being unkind and cruel to him, which led to him becoming the character that he is at the end of the movie. And I think like you have to look at that and think, you know, if it's possible for someone like that in the real world to, and I mean maybe not exactly to that extent, but to do something horrifying that maybe kind of inspires other people, it's a call to action of let's remember to be kind to people, and let's remember to be helpful to people. And even if it's like someone we really don't like or someone that makes us feel uncomfortable, to still treat them as you would want yourself to be treated. So, and I think that's, like I said, I feel like if the end of the movie had the Joker like realizing like what he did was wrong, or having someone else kind of spelling it out, I feel like that's kind of like just an obvious answer to saying like, now just in case you guys didn't realize like what he did was bad and now he's sorry for it. I think that's kind of what makes the movie interesting, is that you literally have this character at the end, you know, possibly being victorious in what he was trying to do, even though we know like, wow, like but all these bad things had to happen for him to become this character and to do what he did. So yes, it's scary. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But I think at the end of the day, we have to remember what led to him doing what he did, and what can we do moving forward when we see people that maybe have a mental illness, or that maybe are frail and that possibly need our help. So even though it feels like it's kind of doing one thing, I think it's like remember how this all happened.
Yeah, and again, if you interpret the events of the film as having actually happened, there's a lot of interesting story ideas here.
Yeah.
For example, the character, the Joker, who becomes like Batman's archenemy.
Yeah.
Perhaps he's actually somebody who was inspired by Arthur Fleck.
Yeah.
Maybe Arthur Fleck doesn't actually become the Joker.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he serves as the inspiration for a different person who becomes the Joker we all know and love.
That's true. That's another idea.
The Gotham TV show plays with that idea a lot. There's
Right.
there's a couple of characters who are in this show that aren't the Joker, but they're like the Joker.
Right.
And
yeah,
it's suggesting that these are people who are like influences for the Joker.
Right. Okay.
And then there's this huge question of, you know, do we want to see this version of Batman?
Yeah.
Because they unnecessarily shoehorn Batman's origin into this movie.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a totally different, if they go, again, you made a point of saying this is a standalone movie.
Yeah.
perhaps because it's done so well, they'll consider doing a follow-up.
Maybe, yeah.
But I feel like it's a totally different version of Batman now because, if this version of Thomas Wayne is as he is presented to us by Arthur, then his being gunned down in Crime Alley or whatever that alley was has a totally different connotation. And ergo, if Batman comes around sometime in the future to essentially avenge his parents, he's actually unjust, like not in the right. And, as a Batman fan, that really concerns me to I guess it would make for an interesting movie, but I don't want to see a version of Batman where he actually goes on his crusade because of the wrong reasons, because his parents were actually, and they weren't justly killed either. Like his dad said some mean stuff, but that, Joker clown guy had no reason. He shouldn't have just straight up murdered them.
Yep.
And I thought this is a little more nuanced than the Tim Burton Batman, where they just literally have the Joker be the killer of his parents.
Right.
But I was like, it's still like, no, you know what? Both the origin of Batman and the non-origin of the Joker work better when they're not connected. The murder of the Waynes works better when it is a random act of violence and not in relation to some other character. It's just something random that happens. And part of the tragedy then of Batman's crusade is that he's trying to stop something random from happening. Yeah. And that he can't find the resolution he's looking for. And then with the Joker, what makes his antagonism with Batman so interesting is the fact that they have no historical baggage. There's nothing connecting them other than the fact that they've developed this relationship together.
Yeah, because I suppose the Bruce Wayne in this movie, as he grows up and becomes a young adult and whatnot and eventually becomes Batman, I imagine like he would probably at some point figure out that with his parents being killed during this riot, that like it was a riot that was basically caused by the Joker. So I get, in that case it makes it more personal, right? Instead of it being a random act of violence where he just decides to fight crime in general. Yeah, I guess like you do change the meaning in a way by having him, like learning about the fact that the Joker caused this this riot, and as a result, it's kind of like I'm personally after him. So no, that's interesting. I hear you. I didn't mind it because I think it was cool that instead of it being so directly like it's the Joker killing Bruce Wayne's parents, that instead like it's someone else that was inspired by the Joker, and that if anything, like another way I read it was, you have the Joker going through these things in the movie that turns him into the Joker that eventually causes this riot. The riot kills Bruce Wayne's parents. And it's almost like with this being the inciting incident of Bruce Wayne's life that eventually results in him becoming Batman, he's becoming, I guess, kind of like a better version of like what the Joker's doing because like he's trying to fight crime in more of a just way. So it's like that is some good that came out of this bad riot, out of this riot that shouldn't have happened in the first place. That's kind of the way I looked at it.
I will say the moment or like the one scene where he feels like the Joker is when he goes on the talk show in the makeup. Yeah. Just the way he moves and the way he speaks and what he says.
Kissing the girl.
Yeah.
That was definitely a big like, wow, that's a typical Joker, right? It's like, that's so sweet, but like, this is not like that only lasts temporarily.
And so I was like, okay, this reminds me of, there's a comic book called The Dark Knight Returns. Yeah. Wherein the Joker goes on a talk show and everything seems fine at first, and then he ends up killing a bunch of people.
Right, yeah.
And I was like, this reminds me of that, which is nice to have at least some callback to the comics here. But even though he is the most like the Joker in that movie, you could probably just play that scene and you'd have, this is what they're trying to say here.
Right.
Because everything the Joker says there about society and about people, and it's like this is everything the director and the writers and everyone are trying to say. Yeah. Even though they're just putting stuff out there, this is clearly what they're trying to communicate. And I heard like one person say on YouTube that they felt that was lazy, the way that Joker just kind of comes out and says, here's what we're trying to say here in this movie.
Right. Yeah,
Did that bother you at all?
No. Once again, like I feel like I was just so invested in the story, and I like the fact that so he kills the three guys on the subway, and then I feel like him being on the talk show, of course, is like the culmination of everything that we've seen in the movie, right? Like they're talking about the state of the city. They're talking about like he's admitting to killing these people. It's going to result in him killing Murray Franklin. And there's even like a really tragic part where he says, like I killed those three guys, and of course everyone's up in arms and freaking out. But of course, if someone shot me, people would just step over my body. Like no one would care if I was shot. And it's kind of a sad thing to hear this guy that, once again, instead of being like, oh, the Joker's crazy and does all these crazy things, like in a way, like he's kind of emotionally venting about the fact that like, you know, like my life kind of sucks. Like here are all the things that have happened to me. And you know what? You know, the cherry on top is you mocking me on TV, Murray. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shoot you. And then to end that off with like him going up to the camera and saying, and you know what they say, and before he gets to say life, he gets cut off. So I thought it was a great culmination of, you know, like here's everything that's been happening in the movie. And like, yes, we're going to put it on the spotlight because that's kind of what the movie is about. That's him finally being able to talk to all these people, which of course is going to lead to the rioting and all the craziness that ensues afterwards.
And here's where I'm torn. Part of me wants them to just keep this as a standalone movie and just keep it as it is. But then there's also part of me that actually is kind of interested to see what would the Batman in this Gotham City look like.
Right. Yeah.
And someone pointed out online that this would actually be a chance for, like, you know, the other side of the coin to be represented in this universe.
That's right. Yeah.
Because we've seen everything from the Arthur side. So, like, for adult Bruce to come in and he would be representing the other, you know, 1%, I suppose. Don't know if people would be as excited to see that movie or not, but
yeah.
Do you have any other spoilery things to talk about before we wrap up here?
Oh God, let me think here. So one scene that I'd like to talk about that I think once again shows off quite well who the Joker is, was the scene where he has the coworker who gave him the gun. He has him and the midget come over to visit him, and like he stabs the one coworker with the scissors, I think, and then after that. When he says to the midget, he's like, you know, I like you, you can go. But then, of course, he goes to the door, which is locked, and he can't reach it. That was a great moment. Once again, kind of calling back to the whole pencil magic trick where you laugh at the visual gag of the midget not being able to reach the lock. But then you're also kind of scared because he lets the midget go. He does let the midget go. He lets him live, and he like kisses him on the head. He's like, I like you, treat me like, and whatnot. But the whole time you're watching it, you're kind of like nervously laughing because you're like, is he just going to open up the door, let the midget go through, but then maybe grab him and bring it back in and stab him or take out a gun or shoot? Like, it's one of those things where, I like how kind of unpredictable the Joker character can be. Is like, you wonder, is he going to let this midget go or is he not? So I thought that scene was well done. And I also really like the scene too where he's kind of like holding the gun earlier on, and he's talking about like, oh, you know, like, oh, here's some of my dance moves or whatnot, and then he's and I can't remember what the line is, but something along the lines of like, I dance better than this guy, but then he actually like fires a bullet into his wall, and yeah, like you kind of get lulled into him kind of like pretending like he's talking to someone. You're like, oh, this is fine, this is okay, and then bang, the bullet shot goes off, and you get quite the jump scare out of it. So yeah, those are scenes that I like. Like, I pretty much liked, you know, all the scenes of the movie, but I think those are ones that we hadn't talked about quite clearly yet that I thought were really good.
So coming around to final thoughts, as I said earlier, Joker is a movie. It is a film to be seen because it is a very interesting film that has a lot to say about a lot of what's happening in the world without officially saying anything.
Yeah.
And it certainly is a cautionary tale for us in the world we live in today, especially with how we interact with each other online, to remind ourselves to be kind, to be charitable to one another, especially when we're in public, we're on the street. We have no idea what everyone else is going through. And even if we're having a bad day, there's no excuse to take that on somebody else.
Yep, agreed. I thought the movie, it's weird to say, like, I loved this movie because it wasn't like, it was a fun, enjoyable movie. It was a hard movie for me to watch. One of the most horrific movies I've seen in a long time. Very disturbing, but exceptionally well-crafted. Joaquin Phoenix, I hope he wins the Best Leading Actor Oscar. I don't know if he's going to, but he's my vote for sure. I think he gives a great performance, as do a lot of the other cast members too. I love the look of the movie. I love the sound and the music of the movie, and it was just one of those experiences, one of those cinematic experiences where, you know, like the credits roll. And, you know, I didn't feel like, oh, just get up and grab your popcorn and call it a day. Like I kind of just watched the credits for a few minutes. and process what I had saw, what I'd seen. I had processed what I'd seen, and it was a mesmerizing work for sure. A movie that I'm not really in any rush to watch anytime soon, but maybe when I buy it on Blu-ray, I'll watch it again. But then after that, I think I'll be good for a while. But there's no doubt in the power of the movie, but not in the power of inspiring the kind of things that you see, but in inspiring what you don't see, inspiring, let's be good to each other, let's be kind, and just really, really try your best to be good to other people, even if you're not a huge fan of them, even if you don't like them. That doesn't mean that you can't treat them lovingly. Yeah,
this movie is dark.
Yeah,
it can be disturbing, and it has a lot to say about mental health, about the way that different people in society interact with each other. So, and if you're a fan of DC Comics and you're a fan of the Joker, you will probably have a hard time enjoying this film on a certain level. Because, as I said way earlier in the podcast, it could easily be a different movie if you just erased some of the names and changed the location.
Yeah.
And that honestly will affect my Bat Cookie rating. My frustrations with how it chooses to adapt DC Comics lore leads me to be in a position where I don't enjoy the movie as much as I would like to.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give Joker 3.3 out of 4 Bat Cookies.
Okay, wow. I thought you were going to give much lower. I'm going to give it 3.6 out of 4 Bat Cookies. Yeah, I thought it was absolutely fantastic, but not in a enjoyable kind of way, but in a it still needs to be seen, because I feel like there is something to be learned about this story.
And this is actually the final comic book film of 2019.
Yeah, that's right, huh?
Surprisingly, right. This time last year we still had 2 or 3 movies that were yet to come out.
Yeah, Spider-Man of the Spider-Verse and Aquaman. Yeah, that's weird. Yeah, wow, that's right. No other.
All the other major movies that come out this year are non-comic book based. So expect our comic book films of 2019 episode sooner than you got it last year.
Yeah.
Because I think we'll wait a little longer for Joker to kind of it's already made a lot of money, but to get its last little dollars in.
Right.
And 2019 has certainly been an interesting year for comic book films. There's been some highs, there's been some lows, and there's been some interesting places in between. So look forward to that soon. And Joker is now in theaters. If you're 14 years old in Canada, you can see it. If you're in the States, you got to be 17. So, yeah, if you're an adult and you're in an emotionally healthy place, definitely check this movie out.
Yep. And if you don't feel like seeing the movie, I understand that. Just I obviously don't be that person that gets into conversations with other people about this movie and talk like you've seen it. It just means, if you don't want to see the movie, that it means you're not going to be a part of any conversations other than the typical comment of maybe it sounds interesting, or, maybe I will see it, maybe I won't. But that's my 2 cents.
So we want to thank Rob Cagle for emailing us earlier in the episode. And I think we should remind people going forward how they should get a hold of us.
So if you want to contact the show with a question or an idea for an episode, you can send us an email to
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
We are available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast. Share our posts on Facebook and make sure to like our page, because we want everyone to join us inside the Bat Jar.
All right, well, it's time to go into the Bat Jar and decide what we're going to talk about next week. So there's still lots of things in the Bat Jar at episode 150. So, you got something?
I do. Next week's episode is blank, says we get to come up with the topic.
No, it means that...
Why Joe should watch Gladiator?
No. Find something else.
Okay, so I'll leave that out because that is nothing. Okay, I'm gonna try this one. Harry Potter films.
Oh, dang it. We just talked about Harry Potter.
Haven't we talked about Harry Potter a few times on this podcast?
This is the thing. So we did one episode on the Harry Potter books.
Okay.
We did one critiquing the wizarding world of Harry Potter.
But not specifically the Harry Potter films.
But now this is talking about the Harry Potter films.
Interesting.
Okay, so... Well, this will, in a way, complete the Harry Potter trilogy.
That's right, yeah.
By getting around to time with the Harry Potter films. So come back to the Bat Jar podcast next week for episode 151, when we talk about the Harry Potter films.
Harry Potter?
And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Ben the Movie Buff.
Catch you on the flip side.
See you in the next one.